So we'll just do a real quick one today. We're just kind of in that cumbersome, cluttery phase of kind of getting all the wiring and brake lines and everything kind of started. If you want to see a little bit of rot, obviously here's the door frames that we're having pulled out. This basically just kind of fell apart. By the time you take the brace off that actually supports the door posts, they are pretty much rotten. And that support right here was really what was holding everything together. Once we unbolted those, everything just kind of came apart in our hands when we started to disassemble it back in June. This is kind of our junk pile of this and several other projects, but here's obviously the doorpost. Here's the original front cross member that's been torn out. I know we don't really want to see pictures of junk, but here's the other option. Here's the original kind of rear cross member that had to come out that we put the Discovery in. What I've also seen done is that this is cut out carefully and everything's moved over a couple of inches. And so you just chop off 2 inches on one side, move it over, and then add 2 inches on the other to get yourself the alignment that you need for the new rear drive shaft positioning. But anyway, this is kind of where we're at now. We're kind of lightly getting the body back together and getting everything kind of prepped to be ready to go to paint this week. And all the little projects are starting to kind of come back together. Other than that, there's probably not much else really to show off right now. We are upgrading to a mean green starter, and of course there's the power steering pump. And everything's just kind of finally off Buddy's garage floor, more or less, so we can work on these other projects. Make sure you have somebody who has lots of spare space, or that your wife loves you and you can take over the garage, because I'm kind of spoiled, as you can tell. Get a look at the garage that I'm using here with a buddy of mine who's big at rock crawling and going to Moab quite a bit. Anyway, nothing too fancy today, just everything's starting to come back together. The roof's already over at the painters, and I'm hoping to get that other door frame. This is basically the door frame off of a 110, which also fits, ta-da, for the 109. That's also from Rover's North. They were back ordered on the passenger side, so I'm waiting on that, otherwise we'd have to put it back together. Obviously a 302 to the proper bell housing, hydraulic clutch, to a MP435, to the adapter that takes you from an MP435 to a Dana, and then there's another little adapter right here that takes you from the Dana to the Land Rover. You can see it's this extra length here that really makes it to where everything changes in the Crossmember world. And of course that's the original transfer case. But because of the fact that everything sits back so far different, we had to go with a different Crossmember, and this is just temporarily sitting in here, so we'll be able to work back in here later. Other than that, that's our weekend. So let's talk just real briefly about some of the modifications that are going into, and the hassles that you have to deal with respect to the 302 going into the frame, and then of course part of the P38. Not hassles if you know what you're ready for, but we want to point some of those things out. Let's start with the power steering box. Of course, the most obvious of which is here. Oops, finger in the way. Here is the current arm from the new power steering box, and you can see that the linkage that's supposed to come across here is not quite long enough. We do know that the connection will work. All we need to do is basically we're going to be cutting this rod. We'll get a pipe that will have the same inner diameter as that pipe's outer diameter, and we'll sleeve that in. So there'll be a new pipe that will go in here. This will just be the end. This will be the end. This piece will move to here, and then we will sleeve those two ends into our bigger pipe, weld it off. That'll allow us to still have the counter-rotational adjustment capability of these attachment pieces. So go into that knowing that. You also, for the 302, look where the fuel, or the oil filter rather, comes out. You need to get a Ford Racing modification that turns into a 90-degree attachment for the oil filter. Otherwise, you will have a difficult time getting your oil filter on and off because of its placement next to the frame. One of the next things that we'll look at that's something to be aware of is, of course, when you do take and put your P38 steering box in place, one thing we've talked about quite a bit today is the fact that the original Crossmember sits right here. All we did when we cut it off was we made a very careful cut this away from it to leave it in the exact position so the grill will have its placement. But you can imagine that the biggest reason we had to remove that is our radiator. If you imagine that the grill is going to sit in line with this, and the grill is going to sit here, I still have to have room for my radiator and all that up in front. You definitely cannot keep the original configuration of the Crossmember of the grill with the quite long attachment to the radiator, because it sat about here originally in the original stock configuration. Now, the other thing that you look at is, from a measurement standpoint, just get an idea here of just where the positioning is of where this square plate is that we did. I believe mine is, I think, 7 inches by 8 or 9. I can get specific measurements if you just want to ask me, and I can measure that for you. But if you just look basically what we ended up having to cut away, the general placement of what you're dealing with, measurements aren't going to help you much. Your big limiter is your grill goes here. So look at that's what we're dealing with here, is that the grill's going to go here, so you can't go any further forward with this. And then when we talked about how far we went back, we basically lined ourselves up just a little bit ahead of this attachment bracket. Now, in doing that, we had to cut out the original brake line attachment, so the brake line would go to the hose. That's now gone. This is free floating, and we'll deal with that. Now, this is kind of where we get into probably some of the more interesting things. Headers, if you use the advanced adapter engine mount, you cannot use an F-150 exhaust manifold. I've got 2 over there in boxes that are going to be going back. You're supposed to be able to use 2 left-hand or driver's side, left-hand drive, just 2 left-hand exhaust manifolds should work. One will be facing back, the other would have dropped forward and have allowed us a lot of room. This custom header that happened to have come with this engine when I bought it does fit. Currently it just hits the edge of the footwell. I could take that down, have that turned, but look at all the stuff I'm going to have to conflict with. The starter is going to be here, my front drive shaft is going to be coming under, so we're probably going to have to do a custom header to where all 4 of this side are going to come out and they will drop and come under. So be aware of that as you plan. Now, in coming out this way, to give you some sense of how much further everything sets back, if you know that this is your high and low range selector boot, you'll know that they actually usually have a little L in them. This part right here usually turns up at a 90, and it comes up because that typically sits right up against the edge of your bulkhead. Now, to give you an idea of how much further everything's moved back, that would mean that usually this would have set right about in this area, and everything's now back about 3 inches. So we've leveled that out. So be aware of that configuration. Now, we talked about this earlier too. This lever here has to have some clever way of being able to work. I currently just put a little piece of angle iron in because this is a cast piece of steel, or iron rather. We do have something very strong there, so I've used the access panels bolts to do that. I'm not sure if I like that yet, but we certainly know that would be nice and strong. What I could end up doing, so I don't have any conflict with this clearance here, which is awfully close, is possibly put a spacer in, but we're going to figure that part out as we go. This is the other thing too, is if you look closely at this arm is significantly shorter on the transmission side, and you can see I've got barely the clearance that I need to make this operate and function. So we had to go ahead and cut that down very carefully, little by little, and then bore a hole in it. And we've added a spacer nut in here, and we will go ahead and add a much more official spacer as we go. The transmission is now sitting on a different Crossmember that we built on an advanced adapter assembly. If you call Matt Jackson over at Advanced Adapter, first of all, get him to send you pictures of his V8 conversion on his 88. It's gorgeous. And then he played probably a big part in instrumentally designing this adapter piece right here that takes you from the Dana actually to the original transfer case. You don't have to put in a new Crossmember like we did here, or transmission plate. We just decided that was our preference for doing so. Now, the other thing you're going to look at is the fact that look at how much this worked. These holes line up exactly right, and I am resting on the new Crossmember. So the positioning of that, you can certainly accidentally go too high. Right here is where the transmission or parking brake drum is going to go, and I have to make sure that the drive line is going to have enough room to dive under that if this is at the center of the output shaft, and I'm looking at the differential. So far it looks like I'm going to make it, but we shall see. The only other thing that we went ahead and made sure we had room for was we of course moved these back just a little bit, and those have to be modified differently because, as you imagined before, you had a lot more room between your transmission and the linkage for the handbrake and its assembly going back to the drum was all happening right in there. So we're still going to be sorting out how we're going to accomplish that. But all in all, that's kind of the gist of how this project works, is you have some great instructions in the beginning, and then there's just some things you need to kind of figure out on your own. Makes it a Land Rover, right? Aside from that, see, I'm going to have plenty of room for my clutch, plenty of room for my clutch arm, and on this side, everything else is pretty well lined up. We'll just later on, probably tomorrow night, go ahead and make the attachment and make our drills and permanently mount this in with its bolts and washers. These bolts were absolutely destroyed, and granted, I still do need to do probably a final little wash on them before I use them, but these were, I mean, brown and dirty and rusty as rust could be, so make sure you invest in some good rust remover. It'll go a long way for you and save you, you know. Yeah, these right here, these were black and road grime and bronze, and they ain't exactly pretty now, but certainly something I can consider whether I want to use again or not. This is not an actual show-worthy restoration. This is my daily driver, so I can't really see the point in getting it so perfect that I don't feel like taking it out off-roading in the Colorado Rockies. So anyway, that is kind of what we're doing.